Good evening, everyone. Todos, todas, todes. My name is Agustina Checa. I'm the director of the Hitchcock Institute for Studies in American Music. We partner with the Office of Public Programs at the Graduate Center to bring this event to you today. The Hitchcock Institute has been part of CUNY for over 50 years. We strive to celebrate and diversify the study of American music through public-facing scholarship and events, which makes us really honored to be inaugurating this deep dive series in a packed Elebash Hall today. I want to start my remarks thanking all of you for being here today. Your presence, in person or online, is indicative of the massive draw of Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio, the artist we celebrate today, Bad Bunny, and of the power that his music has, not just to celebrate community, but also to actively create it, to nurture that which brings us together and erase, even if for the length of a song, that which keeps us apart. This year, 60 million times a day, someone in the world streamed a Bad Bunny song. Different human beings, each with specific personal hardships and collective struggles, streaming Bad Bunny 60 million times a day for a total of almost 20 billion streams. And I think that says something about being alive today and feeling alive, that so many of us found joy in this perreo-inducing and deeply intimate album. And it says something about this one-of-a-kind artist that we celebrate today, someone who, in capturing and delivering the zeitgeist of this time, turns music into a space of both personal and political uplifting, a platform for celebrating marginalized people, and a tool to enact both symbolic and material changes in Puerto Rico. Always, and especially today, a hub of global culture. I want to thank Maurice Restrepo, who is moderating this today. He is who came up with the seed of this idea that ended up becoming this wonderful event and helped organize much of it. And Kelsey Milian, joining us through the website, live stream, the biggest Bad Bunny fan I know, who helped us promote it. Both of them are graduate fellows working with me at the Hitchcock Institute this semester, thanks to the music department and the Office of the Provost at the Graduate Center. So a big thank you also to them. I want to, of course, thank the Office of Public Programs at the Graduate Center and the Elebash Global Voices Fund. Without them, none of this would have happened. Special thanks go to Karen Sander, who heard our initial pitch, helped us shape this event into what it became, and managed logistics, Jimmy Koch and Chad Glossley for administrative and technical support, and everyone who helped us spread the word around this event. I want to thank HISAM's board and our donors, some of which are in attendance, for your guidance and ongoing support to our efforts. It is extremely hard to keep CUNY centers and institutes afloat these days without much access to federal funding, and it is people like you who keep us going. Last but not least, I want to thank the wonderful panelists that are joining us today. I left their introduction at the end so they will be fresh in your mind before handing the mic over. Thank you, Jorell Meléndez-Badillo, who is an associate professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a Puerto Rican historian of Puerto Rico. Jorell wrote the critically acclaimed book, Puerto Rico and National History, and he collaborated with Bad Bunny himself, writing the short text used in the screens of his residency in Puerto Rico and the narratives that accompany the YouTube visualizers of each song in DeBÍ TiRAR MáS FOToS. Thank you, Jorell, for being with us today. And thank you, Miguel Zenón, also from Puerto Rico, a prolific and highly accomplished saxophonist and composer who was recently awarded a Grammy for Best Latin Jazz Album with El Arte del Bolero Volumen 2, after 12 Grammy nominations and 7 Latin Grammy ones. Zenón is a Guggenheim and MacArthur Fellow who received an honorary doctorate in the arts from Universidad del Sagrado Corazón in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Like Bad Bunny, Miguel is also a globally celebrated musician that seeks to transform the lives of people in the island where he grew up. Through his initiative Caravana Cultural, he uses jazz as a vehicle to advocate for cultural accessibility in Puerto Rico. Thank you, Miguel, for being here. I want to thank all of you once more, those of you in person, those joining us on the live stream. I hope this event inspires you to listen in new ways. And thank you, and I hope that you join us in other future iterations of Deep Dive. This evening will unfold as follows. Jorell and Miguel have each picked songs that they want to discuss with you. We will listen to them together and listen to their insights. They will do once individually and then twice together. Around 7:30, we will open the floor for Q&A. Save your questions, line up by those mics. The event finishes at 7:45, and we will host a small reception outside right after. Atune sus oídos y abre su corazón. Welcome to our Bad Bunny Deep Dive.
Thank you, Augustina. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank the both of you. So we conceived of this event back in the summer, but at this point we're about 11 months, almost 12 months removed from the debut of the album, and we can really look back now at the huge impact that this has had over the last 11 months here in the United States, but also internationally. And like Augustina said, 20 billion streams. How many streams do we think we have in here? A couple million alone? No. How many of you had Bad Bunny on your top streaming artists? That's what I figured was going to happen. Yeah, same here. So I wanted to start with a very general question with our two guests. Just how you got to Bad Bunny's music, or how it got to you. And for Jorell, how the team actually got to you to engage you in the work.
Yeah. Primero que todo, ¿me escuchan? Buenas tardes. Good evening. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to echo the thanks to Agustina, Maurice, Karen, and all the sponsors that made this possible. Thank you, everyone, for being here on an evening Wednesday. It's Wednesday today, ¿verdad? Sí. Discussing Bad Bunny. So I come from the punk community in Puerto Rico. I grew up not interested in anything that had to do with Puerto Rican culture. I was anti-sistema, and so I never learned how to dance salsa. I listened to Tego, I listened to the Noise Uno y Dos, Playero, but it was once I was in the U.S. as part of the diaspora that I began connecting with my Puerto Ricanness in another way, right? I began listening, I did a deep dive into Maelo's catalog. I began listening to salsa, I began listening to plena, bomba. And so with that, I also started listening to reggaeton. And I've been listening to Bad Bunny since 2017, more or less, since Amorfoda. And so I've seen Bad Bunny multiple times across the states in Puerto Rico, on top of the gas station when he recorded La Yompa with Arcángel. And so I also have an altar in my house that I wanted to share with everyone, just to highlight the level of fandom that happens in my household. And so I share that altar with another scholar, Aurora Santiago Ortiz, and so we both also written scholarly pieces on Bad Bunny. We have an article on the notion of nostalgia and the limits of historical memory in Por Siempre, Bad Bunny's first record. And so I say that because I've been a fan, and I was contacted via Instagram. It was a DM message, so Benito slid into my DMs. No, not really, it was a producer for Benito. And so we started a collaboration, so they asked me if I was interested in a potential collaboration. Long story short, I was traveling with my family. We were on vacation. I didn't have my computer, but I couldn't say no. I thought it was a prank at first, and then ended up being true. And so it was life-changing, and I think that for me, I'll say something about this later on, but for me, one of the most important dimensions of this record is that it seeks to democratize access to historical knowledge and to Puerto Rican history. And so for me, it's an important sort of turning point in the cultural conversation in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. Miguel, your relationship with the music?
Yeah, I mean, like Jorell, I discovered Bad Bunny kind of early in his career. And also like Jorell, I connected, even though I grew up in Puerto Rico and I grew up around a lot of music, I connected to Puerto Rican music per se as a way of seeing it almost as a bridge to connect back to what it means to be from a place after I came to the United States. That sort of created this connection. So I've always kind of seen Puerto Rican music that is since then from afar, but it's definitely brought me closer. I remember hearing, I do listen to a lot of different types of music, even though most of what I do is jazz music. And I listen to a lot of hip hop, a lot of R&B, and a lot of stuff in English and Spanish. And I remember hearing Bad Bunny early on around the time when there was basically Puerto Rican trap was really in with, Anuel, AA, and people like that, Brian Myers and other people, Lujan and Mambo Kings, all that stuff. And I remember hearing him sort of like in a collaboration with someone else and going yeah, this guy is better than everybody else. It was kind of it was so obvious to me that it was almost kind of shocking. It's he's so much better than everybody else, and probably in a few years he's just gonna kind of leave everyone behind, and it's kind of exactly what happened. What blew me away early on too was that by the time Bad Bunny put out his first album, which I think was Por Siempre, he was already really well known. He was famous. He was blowing up on YouTube and all this views. So I think they also created a rubric for how you share music using social media, using YouTube, and him and his team. They did an amazing job early on to put him in a place so that when he finally came out with his album, he was it's done. Basically, it was already done. So yeah, been a fan ever since.
Awesome. Well, I guess we'll get started with the music. So as Augustina mentioned, we're going to run through 4 tunes. Jorell and Miguel each picked one individually and then 2 that they'll discuss together. So we're going to kick it off appropriately with Nueva York. Should we start with the video?
Nueva York.
Si te quieres divertir con encanto y con primor, solo tienes que vivir un verano en Nueva York.
Nueva York.
Si te quieres divertir con encanto y con primor,
¿Pero qué es?
solo tienes que vivir
Y este frío.
un verano en Nueva York.
Un ratito nada más. Ey, ey, ey. 4 de julio, Verde y July. Ando con mi prima borracha Rulay. Los míos en el Bronx, saben la que hay. Con la nota en hoy, por Washington.
Got some movement in the audience
Yeah,
already.
yeah.
I love that.
So we decided to take snippets of the songs in order to have more time for conversation. Así que perdonen, I know that I heard some sighs after the music stopped. So the reason why we decided to begin with Nueva York, I think Nueva York, is because we are in New York, and so I wanted to begin with, originally I wanted to talk about Vueltita, because I'm from the west coast of Puerto Rico, and I wanted to sort of talk about what's happening there, and I think Chuy is such a phenomenon in itself. But, I wanted to begin with this one because the voice that you hear when the song begins, that Nueva York, the first voice that you hear is not from Andy Montañez and El Gran Combo, Un Verano en Nueva York. It's actually from Andrés Jiménez. And this song, Mamá Borinquen Me Llama, which is actually a musicalized version of the poem Nostalgia by Virgilio Dávila. And I think that's very important because when the residency happened, Bad Bunny opened a store with merch in Plaza Las Américas. And it really struck me when I went there for the first time to see a shirt with the face of Virgilio Dávila, a Puerto Rican poet from the early 20th century, a politician. And so this poetry book where this poem's from, Nostalgia, is from 1916. And so in an interview at Rolling Stone, Bad Bunny confirmed that he was obsessed with this song, and that it was actually a Rafael Hernandez composition, a musicalized version of this poem that he first heard, and he went down this rabbit hole. And I just wanted to read the first part of the poem, which is Mamá Borinquen me llama, este país no es el mío, Borinquen es pura flama y aquí me muero de frío. And so Benito is playing with that notion of nostalgia. He's also paying homage to Puerto Rican culture, Puerto Rican history, and also Puerto Rican music in the diaspora. What is more Puerto Rican and diasporic Puerto Rican than salsa music, right? Than El Gran Combo. And so I think that for me it's interesting and important how he begins that part of it. And then this music video, and we're gonna see a few minutes of the video as again. It's so important because it locates the record geographically, not in San Juan, not in Utuado, not in Juncos, but geographically the record begins in Nueva York, in Nueva York. And I think that is important for this sort of notion that Bad Bunny is trying to articulate, which is this sort of bridging this gap between the archipelago and the diaspora, and also thinking about the multiplicity of Puerto Rican experiences. And so we see here the quinceañero, that sort of quinceañero indoors in the music video because it's in the cold. And so if we can move to the next part.
Con reggaetón y dembow, ey, con reggaetón y dembow, sí, con reggaetón y dembow, como Bad Bunny va a ser del pop, ey, con reggaetón y dembow, me siento como el lápiz en Café del Dow, cuando yo nací fue que nació el flow, de low a low, ping pong, flow pesado, big pong, con silenciador le robamos las gatas, J-Bone, ey, yo estoy en la mía, no tengo adversario, no, con los yankees los me aguanzato, a correr que otra vez lo sacamos al estadio.
I made a mistake. I want to apologize to the immigrants in America. I'm in the United States. I know America is the whole continent. I want to say that this country is nothing without the immigrants. This country is nothing without Mexicans, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Colombians, Venezuelans, Cubans, Honduras.
Yes. So in the visualizer that I wrote for this song, and in fact, I just sent the historical narratives, and they were the ones that decided which narrative went with which song. I talked about the importance of the diaspora in the formation of a Puerto Rican national identity. Thinking about the first works of literature, El Jíbaro by Manuel Alonso, that was not written in Puerto Rico, it was written in Spain. Thinking about those organizers of El Grito de Lares who organized El Grito also from abroad. And one of the things that I talk about in that visualizer is that the Puerto Rican flag that we're so proud of was not created in Manatí, although it was someone from Manatí, but it was actually created here in New York City, right? And so the importance of diaspora, and I think that there's a overt political message in the song and in this video particularly. That shot of the Statue of Liberty, I'm sure that a lot of you might recognize the gesture towards two events. In 1977, about 20 nationalists occupied the Statue of Liberty and put the Puerto Rican flag, the Frente Armado de Liberación Nacional, and that was done again in 2000 by Tito Kayak, one of our most cherished activists. So here we see Benito positioning himself politically in relation to the political status of Puerto Rico, which I think is very important. And then, that AI voice of Trump, I think is also a very clear indicator of where he stands politically. And this was, I think, someone can correct me, but I think this came out before he basically confirmed what everyone knew, that he was not touring the United States because he basically was protecting his fans from ICE, right? And so now he's going to perform in the biggest platform of the United States, which is the Super Bowl. But back then, it was this conversation about what was happening with migrant communities and particularly his audience. And so it was a way of protecting him. And I think it's also a political move to avoid going to the United States, which is the biggest market for pop music in the world. And it's also a gesture of not needing the United States. And so I guess that I wanted to begin with Nueva York just to highlight those things, perhaps the importance of diasporic thinking in Benito's understanding of Puerto Ricanness, which I think is super important. and also this particular video, which is an homage to diasporic Puerto Rican culture. And one last thing that I wanted to mention is that, this residency shows in Puerto Rico were very Black-centered, right? And I think that here as well, there's an element of that Black Puerto Rican experience that is often ignored because of our racial democracy myths in Puerto Rico, and Benito's bringing it here. And I also want to echo Professor Aurora Santiago Ortiz, who argues in her work that part of the reason why there's so much discrimination against Nuyorican in Puerto Rico is in part because of their proximity to Blackness in urban spaces in the United States. And so I think that Benito is paying homage to that in the video as well, particularly in the part that we just skipped, which is sort of like images, recreating images from that Black Puerto Rican diasporic experience.
I also, of course, I'm sure everyone in the audience knows this, but the sample that's used in there is Un Verano en Nueva York by El Gran Combo, and I just wanted to give it up and honor the band and Rafael Ithier, who just passed away a couple days ago at 99, I believe, who founded the band in 1962. But thank you so much. Should we move on to the next song, guys? So Miguel is up next, and this will be Café con Ron.
We can wait for the clip.
Wait.
Thank you, Jorell. That was amazing, by the way. Yeah, I'm sitting here like, yeah, I got to follow that. Okay. Anyway, when we had a conversation like last week, I think, or a week before, about which songs to pick, it's such an amazing album, and we're focusing mostly on this latest DeBÍ TiRAR MáS FOToS, this album, and there's so many songs and so many directions to go. And I chose this song Café con Ron mainly because I wanted to talk about how, just like Jorell mentioned, this artist is using this album to create a platform and bring attention to, political situation in Puerto Rico and culture and history and all these things. It's really, I've been kind of blown away of how this album has been used as a platform for Puerto Rican music. Now, when we say Puerto Rican music, we could be talking about many different things. I mean, we could be talking about popular music, reggaeton, and we could be talking about salsa. But in this case, I'm talking specifically about traditional, like folkloric music from Puerto Rico, and you can talk about a bunch of different things. This song in particular focuses on a style of music from Puerto Rico called plena. Now, we were joking earlier when we were having coffee in the cafe right next to the stage, that maybe 3 years ago, until 3 years ago, plena was kind of unknown in most places in the world, or maybe like a year ago, I guess, when this album came out. And now I find myself going, oh, you're from Puerto Rico, plena. I'm like, plena? Where'd you hear about plena? It's like, I'm like, of course, it's like, I'm sure a lot of it has to do with this album and specifically with this song. So I want to tell you a little about plena. I have this video that we prepared, but plena is a style of Afro-Puerto Rican music that's kind of tied to another style of Afro-Puerto Rican music called bomba, so they're kind of considered like cousins. Plena is our carnival music. It's music that's very mobile, it's easy to move around and play. It's thought to have developed in the early 1900s in the southwest of Puerto Rico, so Ponce, Mayagüez mostly, and then from there it found its way into the capital of San Juan, and specifically Cangrejo, where it sort of developed into the sound that we now recognize as plena music, right? I want to watch this little video that I think will give us a sort of a rounder description of what it is.
La plena es un género musical urbano de raíces africanas, creado por la clase trabajadora de Puerto Rico con el propósito de distraerse luego de un arduo día de trabajo. El periódico del pueblo, como le llaman, comparte noticias e historias cotidianas y se distingue por la facilidad de transportar sus instrumentos esenciales. 3 panderos, el seguidor, el punteador y el requinto, y un guícharo o güiro. Orquestas como Manuel Jiménez el Canario y su grupo, y Cortijo y su combo, hicieron que la plena fuera grabada y distribuida mundialmente. Más reciente, un sinnúmero de agrupaciones como Viento de Agua, Los Pleneros de la 21 y Plena Libre siguen esparciendo, fusionando y evolucionando este género.
Okay. So there you could see a little bit of a breakdown of how the instruments look. So plena is played with these panderos, these handheld drums that are called panderos, like the Brazilian pandero, but are played like a conga. So you slap it like open hand kind of thing. And there's usually 3 panderos, right? There's like a larger one, a middle one, and a small one. This is very African in nature and also very descriptive of Afro-derived music in the Americas, right? So you have music like this in Cuba and Haiti and a bunch of different places. You have the 3 drums, and those 3 drums in combination, right? Each one playing a different part creates what we know as the plena rhythm. That rhythm that we know and recognize is created by this counterpoint of these 3 drums. And it's usually also accompanied by this guicharo or guiro, which you saw in the video, which sort of serves as the skeleton or the metronome pulse of the beat. Now, why I think it's so important that you know, this was represented in this album and in this song specifically the way is because plena is traditionally used as a storytelling music. Like you write a song about something that happened. Also, you write a song about how much you love the drums, or you write a song about, you know, some kind of social criticism or something that needs to be better with the world, et cetera, et cetera. But in this album in particular, what really blew me away is that plena was not used as an afterthought to the song. Plena is the song, right? So Bad Bunny tapped this amazing band called Los Pleneros de la Cresta, which is this young band from Ciales, from the center of Puerto Rico. They've been around for a while. Their first album came out in 2015, and I've been a fan since then. If you don't know these guys, please, I mean, you know them by now, but please look for their albums because they're amazing. And I remember seeing them here in New York City and in other places and being, man, like, these guys are doing some really amazing things. Not just with the style of plena, but I felt like they had their own sound, right? They had their own sound, like visually they had something really specific to say. I mean, this thing they do with the guayaberas, all that stuff, they've been doing that since the beginning. Like, they had that vision. They've been talking about, you know, what needs to be better of Puerto Rico. They've been, you know, kind of digging into a lot of these issues early on. So when I saw that this collaboration was going to happen, I was like, yeah, you know, he did his research, right? I mean, or someone in his team did. He didn't just put a bunch of pleneros together. He tapped this young group already with a sound. And I want to listen to this clip so you can hear both what plena sounds like in its purest form, just drums, vocals, and guicharo, but also what this band sounds like. This is from their first album called Los de la Isla.
Haga su asignación, por favor. Mucho gusto, soy de la isla. ¿Tú me entiendes? ¿Ustedes de dónde son? ¿Acaso de otra galaxia? ¿De la China o del Japón? Ay, de la China o del Japón. De la China o del Japón. Baila, canta con la cresta. De la China o del Japón. Pa' que recuerden la población. De la China o del Japón. De Huega Huaga para Ponce. De la China o del Japón. De Vieques y Culebra para Rincón. De la China o del Japón. Los 4 puntos cardinales de la China del Japón. Y el centro, que es el corazón de la China del Japón. Pa' los que están por otros lares de la China del Japón. Ay, sí, de la isla somos todos de la China del Japón. Vienes tú y vengo yo de la China del Japón. Ay, hágame caso, por favor, de la China del Japón. Vamos a fomentar la educación de la China del Japón. Si todos somos iguales de la China del Japón. Vale que no haya separación de la China del Japón. Mucho gusto, soy de la isla. ¿Y ustedes de dónde son? ¿Acaso de otra galaxia? De la China del Japón. Mucho gusto, soy de la isla. ¿Y ustedes de dónde son? ¿Acaso de otra galaxia? De la China del Japón. Habla.
So when we listen to this and we think about what Café con Ron sounds like, to me, it almost sounds like, instead of Bad Bunny bringing this sound into his conception of what music is, it's almost like he went like, oh, I'm just going to jump into that river and just jump into the plena world and do my thing in the plena world. Because when you hear the track, you hear the drums, you hear the coro, you hear the guicharo, and sort of like the song, sort of like immersed within that, which I think is pretty amazing, right? Now, the other thing that I want to talk about in reference to the song, has to do with the song, the form of the song, and this is something that I think about a lot when I listen to music. Now, plena traditionally, and a lot of Afro-derived music in the Americas, especially in Latin America, follows a formula, and the formula is usually you sing a coro, like you sing this sort of like melody. In this case, mucho gusto, soy de la isla. You sing that song, and then the coro, the larger, the group of vocalists that kind of respond to you, and then you improvise to that. Then at some point, that coro gets shorter, and then you improvise to that, and then you bring the coro again, make it longer, and then you end the song. I mean, if you listen to plena, bomba, all Afro-derived music in the Americas, especially Latin America and the Caribbean, 99% of the forms are going to be like that. Now, Café con Ron is not like that. And what blows me away about this fact, is that you still have a very traditional sound in terms of the aesthetics of the song. You have the panderos, you have the plena, you have the coro, you have the interaction with the drums, all these amazing things. But in terms of the song form, it's still a Benito song to me, right? That this song is a lot closer to, something like Zafaera or Nueva York or El Apagón, which you have a bunch of different sections within the song. Like, for example, if you think about Café con Ron, to me, there's 4 sections, like 4 songs within a song. Por la mañana, café, por la tarde, and that's that song, right? And then, el humo empañó el camino, that's a different song, right? But it's like slower, and then, voy subiendo, boys, that's like a third part of the song, and then the last song is, en el monte, hoy cerro. And all the songs are kind of have the same drive, same instrumentation, but to me, it's almost like he's taking his conception of what plena should be and writing a Bad Bunny song sort of based on his conception of what it should be. So maybe we can listen to a clip that kind of goes back and forth between all those different sections.
Por la mañana café, por la tarde ron, ya estamos en la calle, sal de tu balcón.
Por la mañana café, por la tarde ron, ya estamos en la calle, sal de tu balcón. De Arecibo hasta Ponce, de Fajardo a Rincón, el humo empañó el camino y no pude recordar el camino pa' mi casa. Hoy me vuelves a invitar.
Yo me iba a quedar tranquilo, pero si quieres vacilar, sube tú pa' la montaña, porque hoy yo me quedo acá.
Ven subiendo, que no le vamos a bajar. Sube tú pa' la montaña, hoy yo me quedo acá. Ven subiendo, que no le vamos a bajar. Sube tú pa' la montaña, hoy yo me...
En el monte hoy se rompe, desde que sale el sol hasta que se esconde.
En el monte hoy se rompe.
Si ando goma botando humo, dale ponle.
En el monte hoy se rompe.
Suban pa' acá.
So when I listen to this, even when I listen to it now, even within the context of plena music, which is involved music and it requires a certain amount of mastery as a musician, this is pretty complex. Like, this is complex things that we're hearing on the most popular album in the world. And the fact that it's being done through plena music brings me to my last point before I pass it back to Jorell, is that, obviously this artist is at the peak of his powers in terms of popularity and in terms of the kind of access he has to a public, right? And when you have that, you can basically do whatever you want. He could have done anything he wanted, right? And the fact that he decided to do this thing specifically, put this spotlight on Puerto Rico, on Puerto Rican culture and music, to me, it deserves all the respect. Even if you don't like his music, and we all do, we all like his music, right? But and I have this argument with folks who feel differently than we do. I have this argument all the time. Even if you don't like his music, you still have to say, listen, man, you have to respect the fact that this person who has this humongous platform decided to use the platform for the benefit of this thing. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Miguel. Start with the clip. So we're moving on to our third song here.
Se oye el jíbaro llorando, otro más que se marchó. No quería irse por la hondo, pero el corrupto lo echó. Y no se sabe hasta cuándo. Quieren quitarme el río y también la playa. Quieren el barrio mío y que abuelita se vaya. No, no suelten la bandera ni olviden la lolay. Que no quiero que hagan contigo lo que le pasó a Hawái.
Great. So, hello. I want to sort of flip what you said, and now I have to say it's so hard to follow that act now. I was so intimidated to share the stage with Miguel before getting to know him last week in Madison. Someone that I deeply admire, and so I really enjoyed your intervention. But to lo que le pasó a Hawaii, I just wanted to highlight a few things. I have two snippets of the song. This is the first one, and I wanted to sort of explain the logic behind the visualizer narrative that was there, because also I think that it connects to the theme of the song, which is what I want to discuss next. And so the visualizer is about the Coquí migration, and I know that Benito felt really strongly that it should be about El Sapo Concho. He actually reprimanded a journalist at the National Geographic because they did an article on Coquí, and he was like, no, it's about Sapo Concho. But I think that the history of the Coquí also embodies some of the themes that he's trying to cover in the lyrics of the song, which is about migration, particularly to Hawaii. So both Hawaii and Puerto Rico became part of the US orbit after 1898. And so what a lot of people don't know or don't think about when thinking about the Coquí is that it was part of that labor migration that was triggered by imperialism at the turn of the 20th century, in which a lot of Puerto Rican families ended in Hawaii. A lot of workers didn't even know where they were going. And so it seems that the Coquí also traveled in that labor migration at the turn of the 20th century. And so that was something that I wanted to highlight, just to think about the ways that labor and empire collide at the turn of the 20th century. But then I think that something that Benito did for this record was brilliant. I don't know if this was him or if it was his team, but just selecting El Sapo Concho, which is, they asked me to write about El Sapo Concho, and I was like, I don't even know what the Sapo Concho is. They're like, you're a historian, you should write about anything. And so I started doing some research and reading some scientific papers, and it's the only endemic toad to Puerto Rico. And it's very interesting because it's in danger of extinction. And so there's a commentary there about resistance to colonial imposition, because part of the reason why it's going extinct is because of another toad that was introduced to Puerto Rico in the 1920s to fight a plague in the sugarcane industry. And so that toad that was introduced, this US toad that was introduced, basically destroyed the ecosystem for our Sapo Concho. And so part of there's a deep commentary there about colonialism, about displacement, but about also, I really dislike this sort of rhetoric of resilience, but I think that they were thinking about the logic of resilience there. And so I think that, Benito is doing this sort of analogy and sort of triggering, or not triggering, I think he's highlighting a conversation that's happening in Puerto Rico. One of the things that I've said before, and I always say when I get a chance, is that Benito is not creating any new discourse around displacement, gentrification, and colonialism. Benito is using his platform to amplify conversations that are happening in Puerto Rico. And I think this song in particular, Lo que le pasó a Hawaii, is a reflection of that. And so maybe we can go to the second part, and then I'll say a few things about that as well.
Aquí nadie quiso irse y quien se fue sueña con volver. Si algún día me tocara, que mucho me va a doler. Otra jíbara luchando, una que no se dejó. No quería irse tampoco y en la isla se quedó. Y no se sabe hasta cuándo. Quieren quitarme el río y también la playa. Quieren al barrio mío y que tus hijos se vayan. No, no sueltes la bandera ni olvides la lolay, que no quiero que hagan contigo lo que le pasó a Hawaii. No, no.
So in my scholarly work, I'm very interested in the concept of archives. And so I see this record as an archive of a particular moment in Puerto Rican history, the moment that we're living right now. And I think that he's trying to capture a lot of the conversations that are happening on the ground in terms of displacement, gentrification, colonialism, you know. And for me, it really hits very deep, that phrase of aquí nadie quiso irse, or en la isla se quedó y no se sabe hasta cuándo, right? Because I think it's part of a generation of Puerto Ricans that feel as if they had to leave, that they were expelled from Puerto Rico, right? And I think it's flipping the narrative. A few years ago in Puerto Rico, there was this conversation around Yo no me quito. There was this famous hashtag Yo no me quito, and it was this sort of trope of, you know, I stay here and I endure the hardship of Puerto Rico, and that is a sense of pride. And I think that Benito is flipping the narrative with this sort of discourse, because again, part of the reasons why I dislike the logic or the discourse of resilience is that they celebrate Puerto Ricans for being so resilient, but that discourse obscures the reasons why Puerto Ricans need to be resilient all the time, right? The structural factors. And I think Benito is highlighting those. And I think the song really struck a chord with Puerto Ricans. And, you know, in an interview, Benito said that, you know, part of the reason that he brought La Sanse to one of the, I think it was the Grammys or the Emmys, it was because he didn't have the chance to go to La Sanse. And so he wanted to bring La Sanse with him. And so for me, it was so wild that this record came out on January 5th. And La Sanse were right around, La Sanse is like the Puerto Rican festival that closes the Christmas time in Puerto Rico. And so this became sort of a rallying cry. There was also this image, this photograph of Magali Garcia Ramis, one of our best writers in Puerto Rico, with a sign with the lyrics of this song. There was a speech or a sermon, un sermón, by a Catholic priest in Aguadilla, the capital of the Caribbean, in which he was also citing Benito's song. And so I think that it really struck a chord, and I really like to think about DeBÍ TiRAR MáS FOToS as a snapshot, as an archive of this moment that we are living in Puerto Rico. And we can talk a little bit more later about, you know, this sort of notion of Puerto Ricanness that Benito is articulating, because I think it's based on a multiplicity of experiences. It's not one sole Puerto Rican experience that he's trying to capture. Pero ahí lo dejo, because I know Miguel has some comments on this song as well.
Thank you, Jorell. Thank you. So this is my favorite song in the album for many reasons. Most of them Jorell already mentioned, and I think it's just, the lyrics are so powerful. I heard it the first time, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is amazing. But also musically, I think it's amazing. I think it's really brilliant, the way the song is produced, combining things that are very traditional in nature with things that are very modern. So you hear a lot of sort of like this balance between really traditional instruments and really modern keyboards and bass and all this really well-produced things. It really puts it all together in a really amazing way. I wanted to talk about the song briefly in reference to another style of Puerto Rican music, traditional music, called Jíbaro music. So Jíbaro music is music from the rural areas of Puerto Rico, whereas like a lot of more Afro percussive music like plena and bomba are more from the coast. Jíbaro will be mostly found in the mountains or in the rural areas. And without question is the richest artistic expression in Puerto Rico. It's the vastest family of any kind of artistic expression in Puerto Rico. So you can find all kinds of seises, all kinds of aguinaldos, and there are hundreds, right? And variations that are passed down through families is a really, really deep tradition. When you listen to Jíbaro music, even though it has elements that are very Afro in nature in terms of the rhythm and, you know, a lot of the rhythms played by the instruments. It's more European aesthetically in terms of the instrumentation. So most of the instruments are string instruments. You have guitar, you have a guitar bass, and then you have the cuatro, Puerto Riqueño, this sort of like mandolin sounding instrument, which you hear in this song and some of the other songs in the album, like Pitorro de Coco, for example, which is very, like, that's like our national instrument, right, like cuatro. And when you listen to Jíbaro music, which has huicharo and all this thing, is also organized in this specific 10-line verse called decima or 10th that has a really specific rhyme scheme and all this stuff. It's super rich, really deep tradition. I wanted to listen just for a second to a track by a musician. His name was Florencio Morales Ramos, better known as Ramito. One of the greatest, if not the greatest, Jíbaro singer of all time. And we're going to listen to one of his tracks called Juana de Arco.
Oigan con nobleza y el tema que abarco sobre Juana de Arco, la diosa francesa. La historia confiesa la heroína y buena, triunfó en gracia plena, por Dios ayudada, pero fue quemada y tirada en aguas del Sena, pero fue quemada y tirada en aguas del Sena.
Great. So kind of bringing it back, and I'll keep this brief, to my point about plena on the other song on Café con Ron. This artist is using the platform as his albums to bring attention into a lot of elements of Puerto Rican music. I think in the case of this song in particular, Lo que le pasa a Hawaii, and also Pitorro de Coco, which uses a lot of the same elements in terms of the instrumentation and the source for the songs, it hits a little deeper for me because it feels like that's even farther away from the mainstream, right? Like if you hear something with percussion that makes you dance, okay, so this makes sense because it sounds like samba or it sounds like something that I know. But this is so embedded in Puerto Rican traditions and culture that there's no way you could go into this without really wanting to go there. Right, really being attracted to the music of Ramito or Churrito de Bayamón or this music or El Jíbaro, Andrés Jiménez, and really digging into the source and saying, I want that. I want to bring those instruments. I want to put them on my album. We didn't play this song, but Pitorro de Coco, this other song that he recorded on the album, that's even more traditional than this. That's an aguinaldo Jíbaro, follows the same harmony, a lot of he took a sample from a song by Churrito de Bayamón. I mean, they did their research and they did their homework. And again, it's just, hats off for them and for Benito and his team for using the platform to bring attention to this music, which I think is amazing, by the way.
Thank you, guys. So we're going to move on now to our fourth and final tune. If it was up to me, we'd stay here for another 2 hours and let these guys just spit all night about the songs. But we're going to move on to La Mudanza.
So the one thing I'll say is that in this song, we did not include the first part. And so one of the things that I was thinking about is that in the tour that recently started of Latin America, there's now this gimmick. There's a video before the show begins in which they say, if you say the magic words, Benito appears. But since Benito could not make it, we just cut that part. Benito, hijo de Benito, le decían Tito. So nada, it was my dad joke of the night. That's why we cut that part. Pero La Mudanza.
Yo no canto reggae, pero sí cultura de Borinquen, PR, archipiélago perfecto. En el mundo entero ya conocen mi dialecto, mi jerga. A mí me importa un bicho lo que a ti te vale verga. Aquí mataron gente por sacar la bandera. Por eso es que ahora yo la llevo donde quiera, cabrón, ¿qué fue? Esto está peligroso. Si mañana muero, yo espero que nunca olviden mi rostro y pongan un tema mío el día que traigan a Otto. En la caja la bandera azul clarito y que recuerden que siempre fui yo, siempre fui Benito. Métele más que yo, tú eres loco. lo que tú digas, me importa poco, a mí me quieren como a ti, y soy serio como Coto. Lugia, ho, ho, cabrón, yo soy legendario, la meto con cojones y con ovario, millonario sin dejar de ser del barrio, pa' que sepa. Aprieta, chamaquito, aprieta. De aquí nadie me saca, de aquí yo no me muevo. Dile que esta es mi casa, donde nació mi abuelo. De aquí nadie me saca, de aquí yo no me muevo. Dile que esta es mi casa, donde nació mi abuelo. Yo soy de Puerto Rico.
So Benito is clearly creating a discursive universe, I think, in this record, right? And I think this video and this song really gets that point across. And so for me, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the symbols that are there that are very quick and they just pass away, but they're also part, I think, of the same universe that he is creating through the music, through the lyrics, through the aesthetics of the record. And so the first thing is that there's this conversation around the flag. And particularly this sort of notion of, the gag law that was passed in Puerto Rico in the mid-20th century, in which, the flag wasn't really illegal to use, but you were targeted if you use the Puerto Rican flag. And so he's also bringing that sort of history of repression and pride in the flag. There's a mention of Eugenio María de Hostos, this pro-independence advocate that died in the Dominican Republic and said that he doesn't want his remains to go back to Puerto Rico until Puerto Rico is free. And so the other day, Benito visited Hostos' grave when he was el mausoleo de la patria, when he was in the DR. And it's also, this sort of conversation around Benito paying homage to Eugenio María de Hostos and saying that when his body is brought back, meaning Puerto Rico will be independent, he wants his songs to be playing. And so that is, there's also another way that he's positioning himself politically. But I also wanted to highlight and mention the mural that's happening. It's also an homage to Puerto Rico's radical protest culture, particularly to a group called La Puerta, Colectivo La Puerta, which in 2017 or 2016 were the ones that actually painted that door in San Juan and San Jose Street that became really iconic, a sort of a tourist destination. And so it was this collective that actually painted the door black. And so the flag, the black Puerto Rican flag, became a symbol of resistance or mourning, depending on how you read it. And so he's paying homage to that because that same colectivo does a mural. I don't know if they still do it, but they've been doing it for years. They painted a mural in the Valdoriotti de Castro Avenue, right? And so Benito is playing with that. The rifles, something as simple as the rifles, the wooden rifles that appear there, they are sort of a representation of the Nationalist Party and particularly the Ponce Massacre. I cannot say how I know this, but trust me, that's why those wooden rifles are there in the video. And so Benito is really careful in the ways that he portrays this history it's so meticulous that it's only a second in the broader video. And I think that also it's important that he is, with Julito Gaston, he's centering blackness, that the Vejigante mass, the Loíza mass, los tambores, it is, as Miguel was saying, it's not as if Benito simply wants to have plena in the background or have bomba or have all these rhythms or like música jíbara. It's centering them, right? And I think that from a respectful place. And in that moment in the video, Julito Gaston, the star, it's not Benito. And I also wanted to highlight that, in part of this discursive universe, it's also putting all those pictures of the struggle and the fight against the Navy, both in Vieques and Culebra. Now we are in it feels so relevant as ever, as Puerto Rico is remilitarized again as we speak, right? As there are fighter jets right now flying over our island, military bases that had been dormant are reactivated, right? And so the video feels very relevant now, and I think that Benito is very aware of what he's doing. And the last thing I'll mention is that for me, it's also a beautiful ensemble of people that are there in that last part of the video. Los pleneros de la Cresta are somewhere back there. There's, different musicians, but there's also radical activists. I don't know if you get to see the video again, there's this huge maestra puppet. That is La Maestra Combativa, which was created by La Federación de Maestros, and now the Certified Teachers Federation, that they were decertified by the state because of their activism, which are created by Papel Machete, a popular street theater group in Puerto Rico that began on May 1st, 2006, the same day that the recession of Puerto Rico began. The recession, now depression that we're living through. And so all of those things are in that video. All of those things are also captured in the lyrics of the song, which is a lyric that is rooted in an anti-gentrification, anti-displacement rhetoric, right? And so Benito is using his platform, again, all of these things that were happening, Colectivo La Puerta, Papel Machete, La Federación de Maestros, Julito Gaston, all of these things were happening. Benito is simply using the biggest platform in the world. Move to the side Taylor Swift, move to the side Queen Bee. Benito's using the biggest platform in the world to basically give a space to those conversations and amplify those conversations that are happening in Puerto Rico, and I think that's beautiful.
Sure is. Thank you, Jorell. I'll keep this brief because I know we want to get to the questions. If you've heard this record, you know that there's sort of like two salsa songs on the record. This is one of them. The other one is Baile Inolvidable. Even though they can both kind of fall within the you could kind of put them in this box of salsa. They're very different songs, right? To me, Baile Inolvidable is more like a salsa romántica, kind of Frankie Ruiz kind of vibe, right? Whereas this song, to me, feels like 70s salsa, right? Like salsa dura, what they call salsa dura. They're both awesome. This one in particular, though, what I wanted to point out, and maybe just to talk about salsa for a second. Of course, salsa was developed or have been developed right here in New York City by Puerto Rican musicians in collaborations with musicians from Cuba and other places. And there was a mix of a bunch of different things, of course, Cuban music, Puerto Rican music, popular music from the United States, like funk and disco and R&B and all these things kind of came together, music from Brazil, and it became this melting pot that we now think of as salsa. Now, this song in particular, what it does that to me is really, it's kind of unique within the context of the record, is that it sort of mixes the idea of the MC, or like a rapper, over a salsa beat, right? Whereas the other song, Baile Inolvidable, he's kind of singing like through the song. In this song, he's MCing, he's rapping over the salsa groove. And he has this amazing band that you saw now in the video, Los Sobrinos, and these amazing players, all these young, amazing Puerto Rican musicians, but his delivery is still coming out of this MCing kind of thing. And the way he's doing it, to me, is almost like a reference to a more traditional, like hip-hop vibe than a trap or reggaeton vibe. Right? When I hear that, I hear, okay, so he's like MCing the way folks MC'd in the 80s and 90s over this groove. And it sort of like brought me back and reminded me of another amazing MC, which most people think is the GOAT, the great Tego Calderón, who's done a lot of this through his music. And I want to listen to a clip of Tego Calderón singing over Planteo Bandera, this Tommy Olivencia song.
Yeah.
Hey, date bandera, estoy sonando donde quieren, ligas mayores, frustrado en la coliseba, échate pa' allá, Leo, envidioso polillero, la licencia mía es heavy como los troqueros, a lo hecho pecho, que te salga por el techo, casco güey, yo también tengo derecho, date cuenta, yo estoy desde los 80 esperando mi oportunidad, con calmita, con la lenta, fui a brillarte como te late, cuando llega el negro calde huye todos sus alicates, guaguancó de tiempo a España con otro golpe, para enseñarle cómo se hace a todos estos torpes, llegó el más caracachimba, so con timba, que se lo gozan hasta las gringas, es que yo no soy leyenda como Bob Marley, pero si rapea fuera un crimen estaría en Sin City.
Bim, bim, y tengo mi bom, bom, bom. Yo nací con mi bim, bim, y tengo mi bom, bom, bom.
When I hear this, I hear a lot of the same flow, a lot of the same intention that when we listen to La Mudanza, even though this song is from 25 years ago and Tego was probably doing this 30 years ago. But it kind of brings me back to this idea that this artist, he's doing his thing, but at the same time, he's also doing his research. He has influences, he has people that he likes, and he's kind of saying, okay, at some point I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna try to put all these different things that I do together, do some plena, do some música jíbara, do some, salsa, and kind of mix it with what I do, and it just makes the whole thing a lot more awesome to my eyes.
Thank you guys so much. We have about 10 minutes for questions. If anyone has a question, come up to the mics on the side. I'm sitting here basically as an audience member like you guys, and remembering every couple of minutes I have to pick up this mic and say something. Would you like to start us off?
Oh, yeah, sure. My name is Cassidy. So, like you already know, I talked to you about, I've been researching Puerto Rico. So some of the main themes, like in my research, is double consciousness and carrying culture across generations. Double consciousness comes from Du Bois during the Harlem Renaissance. So my question is, how does double consciousness show up in Puerto Rican cultural production today, especially with artists who become global symbols? And I guess if we think of it in a smaller spectrum, of like a New Yorican who grew up in New York, but then they go to the island and it's a completely different culture, they experience some type of double consciousness. But I guess for the cultural production today, how would that show up in artists who become global symbols? I guess Bad Bunny is a good example of this.
I could say a little something brief about that. I feel that even though we see it in the mainstream today because of an artist like Benito, this has been happening for a very long time. I mean, you could go all the way back to people like Rafael Hernandez or Pedro Flores, who were here in the 1920s, and were already kind of displaying that through their songs and talking about this idea of being far away from home and creating music here, but thinking about Puerto Rico. And of course, it happened through the salsa era, and you could go on and on, Ricky Martin, reggaeton, all these different things that kind of go back and forth. I do feel that is very powerful and very present because information today travels really rapidly and there's a lot of accessibility, especially to music. But I'm very conscious that because of Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States, it's been happening for a long time, and I'm sure that you have a lot more to add to that.
Yeah, no, I'm very interested in multiple topics around this record, but in my own personal sort of work, I'm writing on notions of exile and diaspora and longing to belong and the idea of home and all those sorts of things. Yeah, so we should continue. We should continue the conversation, but to your question, I think that Benito also went through that when he left for Hollywood. He had that LA life. I always say that I heard or read Yarimar Bonilla once talk about Benito as el primo. That primo that sometimes messes up, but it's still el primo that made it, and so he dated a Kardashian or a Jenner, whatever, right? And so I think that moment for him was also a moment of reconnecting with his Puerto Ricanness. Now, I think there's a danger as a scholar, I also recognize that part of the discourse that is articulated in this universe that Benito's creating is the discourse that was state policy in the 1940s and 50s, is Partido Popular I sometimes joke that Luis Muñoz Marín isn't, having the greatest time in his grave, because it is the sort of the cultural nationalism that was devoid of any sort of political rhetoric. So there's a danger there. But I think that to your question about double consciousness and diasporic thinking, I think that part of the way that I'm trying to think through that is by looking at the ways that there are multiple Puerto Ricos and that Puerto Rico is not simply contained in the archipelago, but I think that that's a separate conversation.
It is.
Pero
Juan Flores is really good to
Yeah.
research, especially within the context of New York.
yeah. May he rest in power.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question. Move over to this side.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful conversation. I know we're talking a lot about Bad Bunny, but thank you to you both, Miguel and Jorell, for everything you do for Puerto Rican culture. So every time I talk to a non-Puerto Rican friend about the album, because it seems like Bad Bunny is the only thing I could talk about in 2025, I always ask them, I was like, how do you like Plena, right? Miguel, you said, I was like, how do you like Plena? Like, this is music from like, it's so rooted, or Pitorro de Coco. And I was asking them, like, what resonates for you, and they always go the beats or something like that. But my question is maybe more for you, Jorell. The visualizers are all in Spanish, and I found myself having conversations to educate my non-Puerto Rican friends about all the messages that you are both talking about in these questions. And I wondered, why wasn't it done in English? Was that a missed opportunity? Was that part of the conversation that you had with Benito and his team? I probably know like the statement that was trying to make as well, but because it's become so global and it's such an opportunity to educate non-Puerto Ricans about all of the issues that the album is talking about, I was just curious about the decisions there.
Yeah, I think, that was never part of the conversation. I think it was simply understood that it was going to be in Spanish. I think that it's very on brand for Benito. Recently he was asked about this and they were like, what about people that don't understand? And he said, I don't care. Literally, that's what his answer was. And so I think that part of it is that Benito has reached this sort of global pop stratosphere level by singing in Spanish and not, by doing it the way that he wants to do it. And so I think that was part of it. And I think that, Benito is thinking about Puerto Rico first and foremost. And then, people he's the biggest star in the world. And so for me, the example is that I always mention is when he received the BMA award from MTV at Yankee Stadium, sold out show. He kissed a male dancer and everyone was like, no, he's queer baiting. But in reality, he was responding to an event that had happened 2 days prior in Puerto Rico when Toquicha and Villano Antillano had kissed and all the macho reggaetons were like, that's so nasty. And so Benito was responding on the biggest platform in the world to a very local event. And so I think that is part of what he always does. And so to answer your question, that was never part of the conversation. And I think it's part of his also political stance on just continue to be true to himself y hacer lo que le da la gana.
Thank you.
Thank you. On this side, and we're running a little short, so if you can keep your questions brief.
Okay.
We try to get through everyone.
Muchas gracias por venir. Es una pregunta hipotética, pero ¿ustedes creen que el hecho que Bad Bunny pueda vender una gira en Japón con música tan específica sobre su identidad puertorriqueña abre la puerta para que personas de diferentes culturas puedan ser auténticos a ellos mismos y llegar a un público global tal como él?
Maybe I'll translate the question. The question is basically based on the success of Benito and the fact that he's been doing this just by being himself, singing in Spanish, digging into his culture and his music, and he's had such success. Does this open a door for this to happen with folks from other places, from elsewhere in the world, not from Puerto Rico? It's a great question, of course, and that's the $1 million question. Is he an exception or is he the new rule? That's kind of like what we ask ourselves, especially as artists and music creators, is like, is this the way it's gonna be from now on, or is this just like a one-time thing? It's just like, it's hard to say, really, for me. Obviously, he's an amazing artist, super creative, very, very relatable and amazing at what he does. I personally think, and maybe I mentioned this also when we visited the class in Barnard, is that he's kind of a perfect storm in a lot of ways, right? He's making amazing music. He has great personality. He's really, relatable in many ways. But also, the way we share information and music now is so different than the way it was, 5 years ago. Never mind 10 years, 20 years. That he has something, a platform available at his disposal that has never existed before. So it's hard to say if this is going to be the thing that's going to happen, or it might just be that it's just a door that just opened just for 1 second, and he just happened to be the person that was there, just waiting with the talent and the delivery, and just took advantage of it. I guess time will tell. That's kind of my saying.
Yeah, and I think that, the market gods are watching, right? It's not a coincidence that Karol G dropped the record, sort of like embodying sort of Colombian culture. Casu also dropped the record, sort of talking about, that other Argentina outside of Buenos Aires. And it also happens that all of them are from Rimas Entertainment. So there's also a formula that I think that they believe that will succeed in terms of market, but I think I agree with Miguel that I think it's a perfect storm, and Benito's riding that wave, and I think that as a historian, it has generated interest for Puerto Rico, and I'm also riding that wave. So it's of like trying to amplify Puerto Rican history.
Gracias.
Thank you so much. I'm being told by the higher-ups that we only have time for 2 more questions, so maybe the 2 of you combine your questions and we'll answer them together, and then the others, we have the short reception afterwards. Maybe we can continue the conversation out there.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the presentation. I have a question. I was wondering if you can talk about Calle 13 and Bad Bunny. And I grew up listening to Calle 13. I was a big fan of Calle 13 and René, and their respective approaches to politics, I guess, and how it seems to me Bad Bunny is also political, but in a very different way from René in this instance. And maybe the other question is, how do you see the relationship between like what Bad Bunny is doing in terms of his cultural production and actual political change in the island itself, whether this is going to catalyze that?
And maybe you guys, I didn't see you there, I'm so sorry, can ask your questions now and then we'll answer together.
Yeah. So I had a question about, it's kind of short, about influences. Something I noticed about Bad Bunny, one of the best things a musician can have is curiosity and checking out a lot of music and just like listening to a lot of music. And I know for a fact he does that like in real life. I had a friend who was playing at this jazz club called Django, and he was listening to her music, and he's always checking out like new music. So I was wondering if Miguel, when you went on the deep dive, if you encountered something that you were like, oh, this is coming from here, because we saw that with Maelo when he did the ding, 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 ding. So yeah.
Yes, hi. Regarding on the theme of recovery of memories and recovery of the continuity between the diaspora and the island, I'd like to know whether his work engage with the more radical phase of anti-colonialism. I'm thinking Los Macheteros and whatnot, or whether he positioned himself related to that, or whether you might help us see where that fit in that universe with his popularity. Thanks.
Okay, perfecto. Do we have another hour to answer those questions? No, mentira. So René and politics, I think that is a really important point, because I think that René was super important in the politicization of Benito. René has been political for the longest time, but I think that, part of what happens with Benito is that we saw Benito grow up in the spotlight. Right? He made it big when he was, in his early 20s, teens, 20s. And so we've seen him change over time. And one thing that I say is that, being in Puerto Rico politiza cualquiera. So being in Puerto Rico politicizes anyone, right? And just living through the apagones. And, he has access to things that other Puerto Ricans don't have, but he is there, he's seeing what's happening. Also, I have this colleague, Mayra Vélez Serrano at the University of Puerto Rico, who developed this idea of the crisis generation. And so Benito's part of that crisis generation, in which the only thing that generation has lived through is crisis. And so René is also part of that, but René was already politicized, and I think that it was a huge influence in his political development, in positioning himself politically. And I think that the last election cycle was super important for Benito because, he was paying for ads against the New Progressive Party in Puerto Rico with things like, every time you lose power, remember it's the PNP's fault. Or a vote for the PNP is a vote for corruption. And I think that there's something there with Residente. I'm sure that he has a burner IG account. And you could see the influence of La Colectiva Feminista en Construcción. You could see the influence of other things happening in Puerto Rico, which ties to the last question that maybe I can just briefly comment on, to the sort of the anti-colonial practices. I think that, again, this is also a product that is marketable, right? And I think that in terms of, that's why cultural nationalism is a danger in my opinion, because that is why Puerto Rico is still a colonial possession of the United States, because the state succeeded in articulating a project of cultural nationalism. And so I think that Benito is now grappling with those anti-colonial histories. Again, he's learning, I think that to the second question, which I'm not gonna address further, but I think that there's something about Benito having imagination, and I think that in Puerto Rico there's a lack of imagination in imagining an other Puerto Rico, a liberated Puerto Rico, and I think that Benito's playing with that, maybe not positioning himself with the history of los macheteros, but the people that put the flag in the Statue of Liberty in 1977 were from the Frente Armado de Liberación Nacional, which was a militarized branch of the pro-independence movement, and he's paying homage to that. So I think there's something there, and I think it goes hand in hand with his studies of Puerto Rican history, because again, studying history radicalizes people because it fosters critical thinking, and that's why history and the humanities are under attack in this country and in Puerto Rico. Perdón, me sentí como un political speech.
That's awesome. Maybe I'll say just something briefly about the question on this side about influence. As a musician, as a music creator, I feel like one of the things that you always try to do is keep your ears open and not sort of like live in a bubble, right? So like once you get into that bubble and you're not listening to what's coming from the outside, that's when you stop like creating, you start repeating yourself, just doing it over and over again. And I feel, like Jorell mentioned, with this artist in particular, when we first discover him, he was a product of the machine, right? The music he was making when he was making trap with Luyan and all those guys, it wasn't really that different than anyone else, right? He was different, right? His delivery was different, but the music was not. So we see him grow, not just in terms of his delivery, but also in terms of the way he's creating, the way he's saying, no, I want to do this on this album, and I want to do the song that has bossa nova, or another song that has this. And it's been sort of like a big growth that of course culminates on this album that we are discussing now. And of course the next album might be something totally different and might go in a different direction. But to me, what's admirable about an artist like this is not necessarily talent, right? Talent is great, and there's a lot of talented folks out there that can do things really, really well, but the willingness to keep your ears open and keep growing and finding influences and dig a little deeper and see what else is out there, I think that's really one of the keys to his success as a music creator, right? I mean, just talking about music, and I think one of the keys of his success is the fact that he's constantly, going to the jazz club, going to the plenazo, listening to records. You could tell, I mean, he brings Los Premios de la Cresta, Chuy, all these independent groups, independent music group that if you don't really dig deep, you're not gonna know about them because they're not being played on the radio, right? They're not gonna show up on your Spotify playlist or whatever. So the fact that he's doing this is really the sign to me of someone who's not only talented, but even though that this person at the peak of his powers, he's still looking for the next thing. What's gonna be the next thing? What's something that I don't know about that I can use as a tool to create? So Respeto, Benito.
Thank you all for coming. Give it up to Miguel and Jorell. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Augustina. Thank you to the Graduate Center. And please join us outside for a little reception.
Gracias a ustedes, su día y disculpas.